大麻同海洛因、鴉片一樣都係毒品嘅一種。根據危險藥物條例，大麻同大麻樹枝均屬危險藥物種類。因吸食、種植、販賣大麻而被捕定罪嘅亦常有所聞。而大麻同迷幻藥亦成為1960年代西方反社會嬉皮士嘅迷失標記。喺過去，因住最早嘅 Freemason 陰謀，各國都視大麻為毒品，並且嚴加打擊。但對比大麻喺過去幾千年嚟都係合法使用，被禁嘅時間只係近幾十年。喺過去，美國政府甚至曾經鼓勵農夫種植大麻。
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East. For centuries prior to about 1850, all the ships that sailed the western seas were rigged with hempen rope and sails. For the sailor, no less than the hangman, hemp was indispensable. A 44-gun frigate, like our cherished old Ironsides, took over 60 tons of hemp for rigging, including an anchor cable 25 inches in circumference. The Conestoga wagons and prairie schooners of pioneer days were covered with hempen canvas. Indeed, the very word canvas comes from the Arabic word for hemp. In those days, hemp was an important crop in Kentucky and Missouri. Then came cheaper imported fibers for cordage, like jute, sisal, and manila hemp, and the culture of hemp in America declined. But now, with Philippine and East Indian sources of hemp in the hands of the Japanese, and shipment of jute from India curtailed, American hemp must meet the needs of our Army and Navy, as well as of our industries. In 1942, patriotic farmers, at the government's request, planted 36,000 acres of seed hemp, an increase of several thousand %. The goal for 1943 is 50,000 acres of seed hemp.
然而，由於大麻用途廣泛、廉價，直接影響各財閥，包括杜邦化工同埋標準石油嘅利益。因此，財閥們就以大麻可以被作為藥物濫用嘅特性，以製造問題、演繹問題、提供答案嘅方式，一次過將大麻掃除。佢哋除咗喺報章製造輿論，指墨西哥人到美國後，佢哋濫藥嚴重，佢哋所濫用嘅係邪惡嘅野草。於1935年、1936年代，更以大麻另一個嘅名稱 marijuana 為題材，拍攝多套濫用大麻產生禍害嘅電影。於是1937年，美國政府通過法案禁制 marijuana。全國醫生協會喺最後關頭先至提出反對。代表 Dr. William Woodward 表示 marijuana 並唔係大麻嘅常用名詞，因此甚至常常處方大麻嘅醫生亦唔知道法案所指嘅 marijuana 係大麻。雖然全國醫生協會其後繼續反對，但直至1939年，由於有3000名醫生被控非法處方大麻，最終全國醫生協會亦妥協，最後只有3名醫生被控。亦因為呢一條歷時幾十秒辯論所通過嘅法例，一種有多種用途嘅植物一夜間被禁絕。而聯合國更係直至1961年先至禁制大麻，將大麻列入麻醉品單一公約嘅名單之內。
The book also takes us on a journey of the bizarre, the curious origin of marijuana prohibition. Only in the 20th century did the ancient hemp plant become a frightening new drug. The Mexican slang word, marijuana, was unknown to most Americans until it began appearing in newspaper headlines early in the century. Marijuana horror stories, works of pure fiction, were staples of the sensationalistic newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst. But even respectable papers printed outrageous tales. Although this story would be relegated to the tabloids today, it was fit to print in the distinguished New York Times on July 6, 1927. A Mexican woman and her 4 children are driven insane by marijuana, the New York Times reported. It went on to say that neighbors rushed to the house to find the entire family insane.
It is convinced that he is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted. It is recommended, Your Honor, that the defendant be placed in an institution for the criminally insane for the rest of his natural life. The next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
Although alcohol prohibition required a constitutional amendment, marijuana prohibition was brought about by a single federal law, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. The driving force behind this law was Harry J. Anslinger, America's first drug czar. Anslinger was the government's expert witness during 1937 congressional hearings on the proposed Marijuana Tax Act. As proof of marijuana's malevolence, Anslinger introduced into evidence the bogus Hearst newspaper headlines that trumpeted the violence, insanity, and death allegedly caused by marijuana.
In 1937, when the Marijuana Tax Act was established, there were no data of any sort, much less scientific, about whether this compound was harmful or not. There was just evidence it was being used by people whom we distrusted and feared, and that it was associated with lower class people.
You go back and read the record in Congress, it's amazing the lack of information. There were literally questions by members of Congress saying, what is this marijuana? Is it a narcotic or what is it? And there would be a sentence, someone would stand up and say, oh, it's the most dangerous new drug coming down the pipe.
In terms of what Congress knew in 1937, they didn't know any of that history. The only history that they were given was all these cock and bull stories about how it made people crazy and they went out and killed people under the influence of marijuana.
The Tax Act was built on lies, and I think it's outrageous that we have legislation that still exists today that was based on lies.
Despite opposition by the American Medical Association, Congress passed the law unanimously after debating for a grand total of 90 seconds. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed it into law on August 3, 1937. Theoretically, the new law did not actually prohibit marijuana and hemp. Only a constitutional amendment could do that. But by imposing prohibitive taxes and mountains of red tape, it made cultivation, processing, sales, and any use of the hemp plant whatsoever virtually impossible. Technically, farmers could still legally grow a hemp plant like this one, but only if they could somehow grow it without the leaves and flowers. This law is still in effect today. The full reasons behind marijuana prohibition are still being debated. Some experts think racism played a part.
So that when poor people, immigrants, take the drugs, we're afraid they're going to rise up, smite, steal, and take the white women. And so we outlaw the drugs because of our fears over that.
Others think Harry Anslinger was motivated by ambition and power.
A great deal of the reason that marijuana was prohibited was because of self-aggrandizement at the federal level, especially with Harry Anslinger wanting to be the J. Edgar Hoover of his own agency.
Jack sees darker motives. His book alleges a high-level conspiracy revolving around Anslinger, Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, the DuPont Chemical Company, and hemp. Before the Civil War, hemp was the nation's second-largest cash crop behind cotton. But while cotton could be processed by machine, slaves were the only cost-effective way to separate the tough hemp fiber from the pulpy core that was used to make paper. When slavery ended after the war, the hemp industry went into decline. The death knell was sounded in the late 1800s when paper makers converted to tree-based pulp.
It meant that you could chop down a forest a lot cheaper than you could pay laborers to manufacture hemp fiber for paper.
Jack hangs his conspiracy angle on events that happened simultaneously with marijuana prohibition. Coincidence number one. A German immigrant invented a machine called the decorticator. This new mechanical processing device was about to bring hemp into the modern industrial age. Popular Mechanics magazine recognized the potential bonanza for American farmers and entrepreneurs. This article heralded a machine that could process hemp quickly and cheaply for the first time in history. Coincidence number 2. The DuPont company in the 30s came out with both a sulfuric acid method for making paper from trees and a new invention called plastic. Jack's book points out that a hemp resurgence would certainly have been a serious threat to DuPont's petrochemical strategies. And finally, there's millionaire financier Andrew Mellon. Mellon was Anslinger's boss, Harry's wife's uncle, and DuPont's banker. Coincidences number 3, 4, and 5.
但由於大麻喺醫療方面嘅療效顯著，以及隨住互聯網普及，人民開始接觸到真實嘅歷史，佢哋抗拒財閥們為住金錢嘅利益而犧牲人民嘅幸福，所帶嚟嘅無理嘅法例同埋壟斷，開始爭取大麻合法化。例如，一項為期長達44年嘅民意調查指出，美國接近60%嘅美國人認同大麻合法化。
How quickly we as a culture can change our minds. For the first time ever, a Gallup poll shows a majority of Americans favor legalizing marijuana by, you can see the numbers, it's a pretty big gap. In the poll just conducted, 58% answered yes, legalize pot. 39% said no. Now, look at how opinion has suddenly turned around. This is pretty interesting here because you see the bottom line, that's the kind of the lime green line. That's the percentage favoring legalized pot. And you can see over the course of time, the x-axis is the years, the very end being 2013, suddenly spikes upward. You see, again, 58% now favor legalization, including this recent convert.
早於1996年，美國加州早已容許醫生處方大麻俾病人，其後各個州份跟隨，包括最新簽署法例嘅伊利諾州，共有20個州份，加上華盛頓特區容許醫藥用大麻。近年更擴展到全面合法階段，科羅拉多州同埋華盛頓州已經通過法例，讓人合法使用販賣大麻。美國政府司法部更明言，唔會對兩州採取法律行動，變相為各州大麻合法化開綠燈。亦因此，美國有農夫開始種植大麻。
For the first time in 55 years, there's a hemp harvest in the United States.
I dreamed of this day for many, many years, and to see this right now gives me chills.
Hemp advocates see opportunity in the crop that is used for fiber to make rope, clothes, keychains, and bracelets. Volunteer harvesters who drove hours to southern Colorado tout it as a biofuel that can be ingested.
I'm a hemp chef. I cook with industrial hemp. I make breads, oatmeals, cookies.
Hemp is a cousin to the better-known marijuana plant. Growing it remains illegal under federal law. But Colorado farmers, bolstered by the feds saying they won't step in after voters legalized marijuana and hemp, harvested 25 fields.
Amendment 64, and that really kind of opened the country's eyes to marijuana, and that opened the door for the legislature for hemp to be able to be, planted.
After farmers were encouraged to grow hemp during World War II, it was last grown in 1958.
It looks kind of piddly, if you will.
Laughlin and other farmers are starting from scratch. This field is being harvested by hand.
至於國際方面，比利時、加拿大、捷克共和國、荷蘭同以色列都可以合法使用大麻作為藥用用途。南美國家烏拉圭亦通過咗法例，預備將大麻合法化。
南美洲国家乌拉圭的众议院周三以微弱多数通过了一项具争议的大麻合法化法案，为国家创建合法大麻市场踏出关键第一步。众议院就是否通过成立官方大麻机构，专责发放生产大麻牌照以及监管相关买卖进行辩论。经过13个小时的争辩后，执政联盟广泛阵线全部50名成员一致投赞成票，压倒在野派46张反对票，通过这一项具有争议性的提案。
而其他國家不同組織亦發起大麻合法化嘅運動，例如加拿大、 奧地利、愛爾蘭。